We need to get started.
All right.
We're going to go back, if it's all right with you,
All right.
since we had to.
Bill Hammer held us up.
Yeah. Since we had to
My short-term
break off.
attention, you see, usually I have to put a message
And we're going to
in.
go back to 1948 and the
All right.
legislative race. I was interested to get you to name again now the four horsemen.
All right. All right. The four horsemen were those candidates that were running for the General Assembly under the leadership of Mayor Hartsfield. And Everett Milliken was running for the Senate. Fred Gilbert ran against Jess Walton, W-A-L-T-O-N. And Muggsy Smith, let's see, Eric was in the Senate, Muggsy was in the House, and Gilbert ran, I think, against Walton. Gosh, cut it off now. We'll run against him, Morrison against me, and Muggsy defeated, he ran against Muggsy.
Well, he was from the city of Atlanta. The rest of you were outside the city limits, weren't you? But you were all part of the Fulton delegation.
Yes.
But you say Muggsy was not a four...
Muggsy was the four horsemen. Here are the four horsemen right here.
Okay. Frank Miller.
Frank Morrison. Fred Gilbert.
Fred Gilbert, excuse me.
Fred Gilbert, Frank Morrison, Everett Milliken, and Muggsy Smith. And Gilbert ran against Walton, Morrison ran against Alverson, Milliken ran against LaCroix, and Muggsy was the only one that was elected out of the group.
Okay.
So now
Of the four horsemen.
Mm-hmm.
So you were not considered then an insider as far as...
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No. Mayor Hartsfield, at every campaign, every stump out during the campaign, Mayor Hartsfield would get on and try to defeat me, and yet because he was spearheading the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
I was heading this group, and Hartsfield was heading that group, so they pointed everything at me
Well,
because they didn't want any part of one government.
right. It was a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what role did the Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church play in it?
Well, I've been a member of Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church for about 55 years. And I was in what was known as the Triple E Sunday School class, and I'm still in that class. And I was president of the class back at that time. And they had asked me, not that group, but that was my primary group that supported me.
What did the three E's stand?
What they did, they wanted me to chair the committee to fight Buckhead annexation. And I chaired that committee and managed the campaign to defeat it and was successful. Then after that, all the Buckhead group and all the people that were on the opposite side urged me to run for the legislature to implement total consolidation, because we had told them all the way through that we will be glad to be a part of the city of Atlanta, but you're going to have to clean it up before you're going to have to clean up your act before we will become a part of Atlanta. And we are for total consolidation of Atlanta and all of Fulton County. That was it.
What did those three E's stand for? I'm curious.
Earnest, enthusiastic endeavor.
Oh, okay. So it was basically an outreach type thing then.
Well, it was just they didn't select me. The Buckhead group, some friends
Yeah, okay.
all over the Buckhead area. I had friends there, but this group of fellows, along about my age at the time, and that class today, I still attend that class, and we have over 100 men, and some of the most successful men in Atlanta in that class. Griffin Bell, Carl Sanders, Slayton, the district attorney. I mean, a lot of them. Judge Dillon, a lot of them members of that class.
Was the Ponce de Leon Baptist Church located where it is now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, right there.
Was that sanctuary there at the time?
No.
That's a
it was
new
not
one.
that time. We just met in the basement, for a good while before we built the sanctuary.
Had parts of the Reed plan been implemented?
No.
But you were familiar with
I was familiar with the Reed. That's the reason that I did it, because they had come here and they had recommended it, and it, to me it just seemed to be what should be done, because they were both PhDs in city planning, and the city paid them a fee to come here to make studies, and I don't think any of the plan was implemented. And they were very interested in it because they were familiar with it at the time. And I just wrote them a letter and told them I'd like to come up and talk to them about it. Told them I'd just been elected to the General Assembly, and I wanted to support their recommendation of total consolidation for Atlanta and Fulton County.
Had you attended the meeting in 1938, I think it was in February of 38, when they presented their 85,000 page,
No.
85,000 word document that you didn't?
No, I was not there. I just saw it in the newspaper and so forth, but so the little nucleus around that Sunday school class was really together with the friends I had in the Buckhead area were the ones that supported me. And then at that time, the Atlanta League of Women Voters were strongly for total consolidation, and they also supported me. And we defeated the four horsemen except for Moses.
And then you introduced the legislation, which was a bill to create the
Local Government Commission, which would work out the plans of total consolidation.
And also
the recommendation and the fight, they started fighting me right on that bill to set up a commission. Fought it. And Hartsfield fought it. And I mean, I remember when the plan was passed. It's ironic because I received a call this morning from the niece of J. Forsyth Gordy, who was he was the head of the Central Atlanta Improvement Association for a good number of years. At that time, he was in the Chamber of Commerce and was assigned and worked very closely with me on this program. In fact, he conceived of the idea of calling it the Plan of Improvement, which...
Was he connected with any other family here? I couldn't place the Gordy.
No, he's not related to the Gordy at the varsity, but he did have...
How about the tire company people?
No,
Okay.
not the tire company people. But he had a brother that was with the, what they call the Retail Credit Company at the time, one of the officials in that company. And a wonderful fellow, really, and he must be, he's in his 90s now, and he had a stroke, and his niece called me this morning to tell me about it. But anyhow, and the whole Chamber of Commerce got behind it. they got behind that plan, the plan. Once they came out with a plan, and Mayor Hartsfield asked me to come by. He wanted to talk to me about it as soon as he got it. And he said, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen in all my life. The very idea, if they think I'm going to turn over this brand new health building down here on Central Avenue to them, to the county, I'm not about to do it." You know, but
Well, you
I
mentioned...
can't let House Bill 23 in my pocket until they passed every piece of the legislation. Every piece of it.
You weren't going to let them off the hook.
No.
Well, you mentioned...
I couldn't have done it at all if I didn't have the veto power.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I had the veto power.
About the testing for the constitutionality of it.
Yes.
And you mentioned that had it been done, had Hartsfield pushed for a certain... Could you
That's
tell
right.
about...
There was a provision in the plan, and we passed the necessary legislation to implement it, that when a land lot would reach a certain population, and if it was contiguous, you don't have this on, do you? If it was contiguous to the city of Atlanta, that the city could file, when it reached that point, they could file a petition in Superior Court for the Atlanta Judicial Circuit, and that court could determine whether or not it met all the requisites and bring it into the city without a vote.
Without a referendum.
And Bill Hartsfield was always afraid. They held all of our bills constitutional. They attacked them viciously. And but they held them all constitutional. That would test any test that went on constitutionality. The Supreme Court affirmed it. But the trouble about it, Hartsfield wouldn't move on it, and it was not moved on until Ivan Allen was elected mayor. And then Ivan tested it, and I told you that unfortunately it came to me to pass on in this court. And naturally I had to disqualify myself because I was the author of the bill. So I had to disqualify myself.
Was there a particular piece of property that was involved here, an area that was involved, that there was an actual case, or was it
Yes,
just
an actual case. There had to be an actual case.
Yeah, okay.
So there had to be an actual case. The land lot had to meet all specifications, which it did.
Did you remember
And
which?
I recused myself. I don't remember which one. I could do a little research and find it, but I don't remember which one it was. But I recused myself. It wouldn't have been proper for me to pass on. So Judge Jack Etheridge was on this court at the time, and he passed on it, and he held it constitutional. And then, it's like I told you before, Chief Justice Duckworth was Chief Justice at the time, and he fought vigorously and finally sold the Supreme Court on the idea that it should not be held constitutional. And it was absolutely divided 50-50 throughout the United States. So 50% of the courts that held it would have been, and 50% of the other courts held that it shouldn't be, that it was an abuse of the delegation of powers of the legislature. And of course the legislature set out the guidelines, they set out everything. But anyhow, they ruled it unconstitutional.
So the only way that annexation can take place now is how?
The legislature could meet and pass an annexation bill by a majority vote of the House and the Senate. They could do it now, but it is not politically feasible now.
Well, could it be done? Could it be done without a referendum, without going back to the people?
Sure.
That was my point.
A municipality is
it's a creature of the legislature.
It's a municipal corporation, and it is a creature of the Georgia legislature. Okay. And that Georgia legislature can do anything they want to with Atlanta. Now, they can't change Fulton County lines. That's a division of the subdivision of the state. They can't change the Fulton County lines under the Constitution without getting the approval of 2/3 of the people in this county and 2/3 of the people in each county that's affected by the change of those boundaries. But as far as the extension of the city limits of Atlanta, it can be done just by an act of the legislature. Now, the legislature traditionally have done what the local delegation wants to do. And they would have to set aside that premise. And a few years ago, I think it could have been successful by taking it to the legislature. In fact, it was threatened several times, but they never did do it. But it couldn't be done now in any circumstances.
It's a hot political issue.
But they could legally do it.
Sandy
You asked me the
Springs
legal
area.
question. And yes, they could legally do it. All right.
Well, now you mentioned 3 areas where they were not able to have much consolidation. One was the airport.
That's right.
Now,
They had the Fulton County Airport at the time, and they had the Hartsfield Airport. Or they called it something else at the time. I've forgotten what they called it now. The Atlanta Airport's what they called it before.
yeah. Did they subsequently deal with that?
No,
Did they create an airport authority?
No.
Or, no.
no,
Okay.
no.
You also mentioned a
Public
term or a concept.
There were 3 things that were not included in the plan, and that was the airports, public works, and schools.
Yes.
And the schools, of course, was a very hot question. And they didn't think they could pass it if they consolidated the school systems. And it was the schools and public works also. They didn't do that. But they consolidated everything under the city or the county, every other board of government.
You mentioned a concept called interposition, and you said that was how you were elected to.
Well, I think
bench.
my stand on interposition at that time was I made a speech at the Hungry Club down on Auburn Avenue, and I think that took a lot of courage to make that speech at the time. It was highly controversial, but very favorable to integration.
And that would have been 1952?
That would have been 1952. Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
when I was elected.
What you were basically saying then was that you did not favor the concept of interposition.
Oh no, I was
Yeah.
support.
Oh, you were
I said no. I said I didn't favor interposition.
Yeah, and
I was
that's
totally
how.
opposed to
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. If we have time at the end, I want to come back to Judge Hooper and ask some
All right.
questions about him, but
All
I
right.
think we need to move on.
All right.
Okay, we had left off on the previous tape with Jekyll Island Authority, the creation of the Jekyll Island
Yeah.
Authority. You were in the legislature
Yes,
at that
I was
time.
in the legislature, not at the time it was voted in, but I was in the legislature and I was on a committee to go down and to Jekyll Island, and there was no road over there, no bridge over there at the time. We had to take boats and go over, took a boat over, not a boat, but
A ferry.
ferry.
Yeah.
Ferry over to the island. And we came back and recommended it, and then M.E. Thompson, I think, bought the whole island for $8 million. That's right.
Now that was an authority. That was created as an authority. What is your opinion of how it has worked out through the years?
Excellent idea. If I could sell it for 50 times that now, and more too.
But it has served the purpose for which it was
Yes.
purchased, and that was for recreation.
And mainly for people that couldn't afford other types of recreation. it's gotten rather expensive now, and I don't know how many people can afford it now, but originally it was set up for that purpose, and of course it was integrated at the time. Black people could go there, and they could, and it was a very wonderful facility in the beginning.
Yeah, I forget when they got the bridge built, but that was a big day when they finally opened the bridge.
I had to buy that first.
Mm-hmm. Well, was there a revision of the highway board during the time that you were in the legislature?
They had vacancies on the board for different areas, and the whole legislature and General Assembly had to vote on them. But I think Jim Gillis was the head of the highway department. He was for a long number of years. In fact, Hugh Gillis Jr. is a senator now, and he's been in the legislature since I was there 45 years ago. 48 years ago, really.
Well, you've named a great many people that you were associated with, certainly in the Fulton delegation, the CAB delegation. Was there anyone else in the legislature that you were, that was helpful to you or that you were particularly fond of? Or?
Well, they were all helpful to me, and I couldn't have done what I did. Mm-hmm. And they were finalists. In fact, I may have mentioned, I think I did mention to you before, that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere with the local government commission bill if it hadn't been for Dick Rich and Judge Albert Tuttle, who was the president of the Chamber of Commerce at the time. The Chamber got behind it. The Chamber got behind the vote, and we had a referendum on the plan of improvement. I committed myself. I said I will abide by the vote of the people. If the plan is passed, and I see that it's passed just exactly like the plan states. And that's the reason I held that House Bill 23 in my pocket with a pocket veto until everything was done.
So, okay.
Now, George Goodwin, he was he was a reporter for the Journal at the time, and George was very close to the city administration at the time, and he knows the struggle to get it through. Mm-hmm. He knows all about it.
George Goodwin.
Goodwin. C-O-O-D-W-I-N. Okay. Still living, wonderful fellow, good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm. Now, you decided that you would run, it had been your intention to run for a judgeship.
Yes.
And that was 1952.
Yes.
Can you tell me something about
that?
Yes.
Oh, right. Yes, I can tell you something about it. I think I can remember the names in that one. What I did, I ran for, let me say this, Judge John McClellan. John McClellan had indicated that he was retiring from the criminal court of Fulton County. That was a misdemeanor court. They consolidated it with the city, that is, with the civil court now. But he indicated that he was going to vacate, going to retire. He'd had some health problems. And I ran along with Ed Wright, who was an assistant county attorney, Ed Wright, Guy Tyler, Judge Calloway, who was on the recorder's court for the city of Atlanta, Judge A.W. Calloway, and Guy Tyler, Tyler, who is now deceased, but his nephew was in that chair right there yesterday, John Tyler, and he all ran, and Wesley Asinoff, Asinoff, ran. And I'll tell you something funny I'll never forget. The night before election, the day before election, the Constitution had a 1/2 page, a whole half of a page, advertising Ed Wright. You know, Ed ran an ad to vote for Ed Wright for criminal court of Fulton County. And Ed said, "I'm going to beat you." That scared me, you know, he spent so much money. And I said, "Ed, let me tell you something. You're not going to even be second." I said, "You're not going to be second. Judge Calloway's going to be second." And he was second. Judge Calloway was second. Ed was third. And Tyler was fourth. And Asinoff was fifth. So I won the race. And then I was on that court for one term, 4 years. And Judge Hendricks, Judge Clifford Hendricks, J. Walter Hendricks, Clifford was his son, I was enamored with him, Walter Hendricks was the one that I succeeded. He had had some bad health problems and indicated that he was going to, he indicated he may not run. And I said, if Judge Hendricks doesn't run, I'm going to run.
And that was for the
Superior Court.
Superior Court.
Yeah. Now, that was in I came on in 57, so the campaign was in 56. 56.
Okay.
So I resigned from the legislature and ran for the Superior Court. No, I didn't have to resign from the criminal court of Fulton County to run at that time. They have to now, but I didn't. I ran, and Hamilton Douglas was on the board of aldermen for the city of Atlanta. A wonderful fellow, really. He's deceased now. I know his wife quite well. And she's in a club that I belong to, a philosophy club. But anyhow, Ham, I told him at the time, I said, "Ham, you know, you're a good man, but I'll tell you can't win this race." And I said, "If you want to get elected, you ought to run against Judge Pye." I said, "You can beat him, but you can't beat me." Unfortunately, that's the way it turned out. And I think Judge Pye had formerly taught in his father's law school, and he didn't want to run against him for some reason or other. But Judge Pye was later defeated by Judge Langford, which proved what I said was true. Yeah.
Well,
so I've been here ever since.
And that's 38, is it 38 years?
38 years.
38 years. And during that time
I've been on the bench 38 years.
Yeah, altogether.
So altogether, counting the 52.
Mm-hmm.
But
you have served in some other capacities. You've taken on, like, you were chief judge. What did that involve?
We rotate the chief judge.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
In fact, on the outside there, if you look at it when you go out in 1974, I was elected by the American Trial Lawyers Association as outstanding trial court judge in the United States.
I was going to get to that. Yes.
Yeah. Now, in the early part, when I was on the criminal court, and having been in the legislature, I was very active. In fact, did I tell you about being elected to the legislature and going to military?
Yes, we had discussed that. That was a very important aspect of your legislative career and of your life.
And of my life, because I made a lot of friends in that, and it helped me politically a great deal. And it was a wonderful experience for me, because I think I told you that I went to the cavalcade down to the state hospital, and I just saw that mess, and I said, something got to be done about it. So I did. And
Well,
we
did you
raised
intro-
$100,000 in the first day.
Yes, you did speak of that. Did you introduce legislation into the Georgia
Voluntary
government?
admission? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay.
introduced bills for voluntary admission and all that sort of thing. I worked hard in that mental health program. Yes. Everybody was ashamed to walk down the hall to a psychiatrist, at that time. So I served as president of the Atlanta, the Georgia. We organized Georgia with the money we raised. They didn't have an organization at all. And we started right here in Atlanta. Raised that money and set up a state office. And served president of the Georgia Association, and I was elected vice president of the National Association and served as president for 2 years and chairman of the board from 57 to 59.
One of the really bad aspects of that was the stigma involved in seeking help. And
Sure, well, we had a lot of sick people, and not only that, I think I mentioned to you before what many people did when the family, with the old-timers or some of these other diseases old people have, they just swallowed a lunacy warrant and put them down in Milledgeville and forget it. And it was just a warehouse for sick people. Warehouse. But anyhow, a lot has happened in the mental health field since then.
One of the activities that I think you were involved in is a sentence review panel.
Yes,
Now,
I served on Governor Carter's Judicial Processes Commission. And get judge sentencing in Georgia because there was so much disparity in jury sentencing that it was just so unfair and abused so much because, to give you an example, we could not try joint defendants at that time. They had to be tried in separate courts. And I heard a case, an armed robbery case, and he was less culpable than his co-defendant, who was tried by Judge Claude Shaw upstairs. And the jury gave my defendant 20 years. Conviction gave him 20 years. And Judge Shaw's jury gave the man who was more culpable 1 year. Imagine what those two people felt when they went in. And so we were trying to get judge sentencing, and we thought, now the legislature in 1935 had passed a bill authorizing judges to fix a sentence in all criminal cases. And it was promptly defeated the next year because we had one judge in Georgia who gave maximum, and in a burglary case was 20 years. And even if it was the first offense, he'd give him 20 years. So they promptly changed it the next year. So I conceived of the idea to set up a sentence review panel. And we set up a sentence review panel that would be composed of 3 judges, and that the president of the council of the Superior Court judges throughout the state could appoint them for a period of 3 months each. And they would come to Atlanta and review all sentences in order to eliminate disparity in sentencing. And they would come at no charge except for the actual expenses for coming to Atlanta that had to meet here. And they'd review all those sentences and then produce them. And I was elected at that time chairman of the administrative board for the sentence review panel, so I've handled all the administration work for the sentence review panel. But we've made an awful lot of progress. So many laws have been changed. I could talk to you for I don't know how long about that.
Well, that was my last question, so maybe we'll get back to that after we've gone through some other things.
All right.
I wanted to move on now to the 60s, the 1960s, and talk about some things that might have been significant court cases. Child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
there was something called the Children's Protective Services Commission.
Yes.
Could you tell me about
Yes, I organized that and set it up because I wanted to set up a procedure for what we call a protective services organization in the government, in the Family Welfare Department, so that when children were abused, that the court could take over and supervise it immediately, and to give the court the authority to pick up the children and keep if anybody could come in and report what's going on, either the wife or the mother or the grandmother, somebody, these children are being abused, well, we could pick them up and we did this through this what we call the Protective Services Commission. And Judge Woolfolk was the judge of the juvenile court at that time, and he fought it vigorously. He fought it vigorously because he felt it was getting into his jurisdiction. But anyhow, I set up this committee. I set up the committee, and we accomplished the purpose. And we set up the Protective Services Committee within the Department of Welfare and got the first $50,000 grant for it here in Fulton County. And it has grown by leaps and bounds.
Now you say the first grant, you mean the first in the state or the first in the nation, or?
It wasn't the first in the nation, it was the first to here.
Here. Mm-hmm.
That's right, first in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And we got the money for it to set it up.
Had there been any case in particular or any situation that
just
had
a need.
led you
I just
to...
heard about it and I got interested in it, and when I get interested in something, I stay with it till the job's done. Just like that over there. You know what that is?
No.
I was chairman of the committee to set up the law school at Georgia State University.
Oh, yes. Well, we're going to get to that, too.
All right,
okay. Well, how about a bail release program?
Yes.
Which was enacted into law.
All right. I decided that it would be a good idea to have a pre-sentence investigation and set up guidelines to where many people who were arrested did not have the money to make a bond, and they'd sit in jail and lose their job and all that sort of thing. And I'm just briefly telling you these things because they could cover word after word after word. But anyhow, and so I set up the guidelines and got the chief of police in the city of Atlanta and all the governmental officials together in my jury room and told them about it, and they thought it'd be a good idea. And I worked out the guidelines and got a $3,500 grant from the county government asking for a pilot project, to set up a pilot project. And we hired a law student by the name of Thomas, who is head of pre-release out of jail right now.
What was his first name?
I can't think of his first name, but his name's Thomas. And I can get it out of telephone directory in just a minute for you. I can find that quick. But anyhow, he has been there. He started at the time, had somebody else, and he came as a student helping the man. I've forgotten the man I appointed in the beginning, but anyhow. And so it worked out, and we set up those guidelines, and the judges adopted them, and the program has grown. And it grew so that some people came down and to find out about it here, and they decided that it ought to be done in the federal courts. And one of the last appointments that Bobby Kennedy made, in his last day as Attorney General, was to appoint me on a board to set up the system for to develop a bail release program within the federal courts. Mm-hmm. And I served on that board and worked out all the details and set it up.
That needs to be on the tape. You need to say
well,
that
I'll
you're...
get it on the tape. And let me see where it is. I won't show it to you.
Okay.
I usually can just put my hands right on it. Well, it has been here a long time. Yeah. Well, I've got it somewhere. I don't want to take a lot of time looking for it. But I've got it in here somewhere. Can't you just take my word that I've got it?
Oh, sure. I'll
All
just go ahead
Okay.
and say
But
on
I've
the
got
tape.
the pen.
You have the pen.
I have the pen. President Johnson gave me the pen that he signed the bill for the federal court.
Were you there at the signing?
Yeah,
Then
sure
you'd
was
have to
there.
be to get the pen.
Sure,
Okay.
I was there.
Okay.
In fact, they invited me up for the signing.
That's great. That's
And I went up, and he signed it, and it's been part of the law ever since.
And that
it's
was
developed here.
and that was in the 60s. Then
Yeah.
that was it's been in effect then during these decades since
That's
then.
right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Well, and a very important case, a very sort of a landmark case that you had was about an unborn child, seeking damages for an unborn child.
Well, that was before I came on the bench, when I was
What?
practicing law.
Oh, okay.
I represented, I've forgotten the name of the case now, but I can tell you who the defendant was. It was the Hempeley Funeral Home in East Point.
Oh.
This lady, my client was her husband, and she was my client, of course. She was pregnant and called the ambulance to take her to the hospital. And they came, picked her up, and on the way to the hospital, the driver had an accident and injured her. And my contention was it also was the cause of some of the problems that the child developed early in life. And I sued and got a judgment. And the Court of Appeals affirmed it. First time they had such a case, first impression on that case. And they held that a child could sue that if the child was quickened in the womb. And therefore overruled the demurrer that they filed to strike the child from the case. I don't want to practice law.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something that happened. That there was a world all over the country, and I ruled on it. We used to have a lady here by the name of Christine Smith. She was the wife of a member of the Board of Aldermen by the name of Gillum. Can't think of his first name, but they were married later. But she retained the name of Christine Smith because she was the censor for all movies in the city of Atlanta.
Was his name Ed?
Ed Gillum?
No, that doesn't.
No, it doesn't ring a bell, but it's Gillum. And he was, she could keep any movie from being shown in Atlanta. And this movie was called the Never on Sunday. You know. And she would not let them show Never on Sunday. And it came to me, and I ruled that ordinance was unconstitutional. And an opinion that lawyers and newspapers and everything from all over the country called me for copies of that opinion. And I sent it to them, of course, but we didn't have any censor after that.
She lost her job.
She lost her job.
Okay. Yes, I remember when that was happening.
Remember, never on Sunday was the first step toward it. Yeah.
Well, the 1970s were significant, and the year 1974 was especially significant. And I'm going to start out by asking you about a trial, Marcus Wayne Chenault. You were the judge.
I heard that case. Sure did.
Yeah.
And Lewis Slayton, the district attorney, representing the state. And it was a horrible case.
Yeah.
1,500 people were in the Ebenezer Church when that happened. Wayne Chenault, he had come to, but it was Chenault. Wayne may not have been his first name, I can't remember.
Marcus.
Marcus Chenault, yes. Well, he had come from Cleveland, I think, either Cleveland or Cincinnati, I think it was Cleveland, Ohio, and into the bus station and got a cab and asked the cab driver to take him to the Ebenezer Church. He wanted to kill Martin Luther King Sr. That was his purpose in coming, was to get Dr. King. But and he went in to the Sunday school class, and they introduced him as a visitor and told him how happy and delighted they were that he came to the Sunday school class. And then they took him in and sat him in the Amen corner as a guest, first time in church. They sat him in the Amen corner, and which was right down in front. And fortunately for Dr. King and unfortunately for Mrs. King, the Dr. King was going to have to take a plane, therefore he didn't preach that Sunday. Somebody else preached. But Mrs. King played the organ, and she was playing the organ. And as they were singing the Lord's Prayer, and right at the end of the Lord's Prayer, bang, 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 killed 2 people, seriously injured 3. Tell you something about that. A young man, 17 years of age, would record the music from the balcony every day. And he had a tape of it. And I've got a tape. I would not let them introduce that tape because it was so prejudicial. I felt that the appellate court might reverse it if I let it in. But 1,500 people saw it. An absolute recording of it wasn't shown during the trial. But the jury, of course, promptly convicted him, gave him a chair, and it's been affirmed by the state Supreme Court. It's been affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, but refused to hear it. It was appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and they refused to hear it. Went back up on another habeas corpus, was affirmed, gone back on another habeas corpus, and now it's still in the federal court. He hadn't been legislated yet. That was 15 years ago.
He'll grow to be an old man. Now you were honored by the Trial Lawyers Association of the United States, of America.
And Judge Sirica was competing with me the same year. I beat Judge Sirica.
Is that right?
He got it the year after I did.
How about that? Well, they had some rather nice things to say about you.
Yeah.
Some very, very good things to say. And it was a signal honor. It really was. And
I've got a copy of the presentation out there, and you know what they did?
No.
They sent me and my wife, flew us out there in a plane to the penthouse in the Hilton Hotel in San Francisco, and received the award out there, and paid all expenses for me and my wife.
But it should have been on the front page of the newspaper here, but it was on the inside,
That's
the
right.
front inside paper, because something else happened that very day.
Yeah.
that got you off the front page, which I wouldn't have known about until I went to the paper to look it up.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought was sort of significant, and it was the resignation of President Richard Nixon.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so,
Same day.
but anyway, it was an honor for you, and they, as I say, had some very nice things to say, and about your contribution
Yes.
in civil law, in trial law.
It's out there. You can look at it when you go out and get the language if you wish. Okay.
Well, you have ruled on some other things that are very significant, and one is the state's employee pension fund.
Yes. The Tate case.
Well, I was thinking about Governor Busby as well.
Oh, yes, I ruled on that too.
Yeah.
Yes, that was tragic, see, because I personally, let me tell you something. I felt George Busby was one of the finest governors we've ever had in the history of this state. That was so tragic. It was so tragic. But my duty is to follow the law. And I gave a 20-page decision. And they didn't appeal it. If it had been appealed, it would have been affirmed. Because, let me tell you what happened. The Attorney General had given him a memorandum, not an opinion, that he thought that it was legal. But it had been repealed, the law had been changed 3 months prior to that as an amendment to the pension bill that the Attorney General did not really research it. If he had, he would have caught it. I don't want to reflect on the Attorney General because it's human there. Shakespeare says, if human there and bound to forgive, and I like to forgive. But anyhow, it was an error, that's all. And based on that, he did it. He couldn't be elected. God has elected him.
Yes, yes, he got a lot of bad press for that. But now, did that result in any overhaul of the pension system, or was anything done?
No, that really overhauled it. It was that act that was just passed, just prior to that, where they could stack on time and all that sort of thing. It was changed.
What they were trying to do was use any state government service to
count toward his pension, which would have been increased as a pension.
Which were basically part-time things.
Yeah. Now let me tell you, I want to tell you something. I won't just be personal about my situation now. Let me tell you, I could have retired 25 years ago on full retirement. Full retirement. And I've been paying on it for 25 years. But I could have taken it then. Judge Jephthah Tanksley retired early, and Judge Jack Etheridge retired early. And I could have done the same thing because I would have gotten credit for being in the legislature 4.5 years. I could have gotten credit for being on the criminal court of Fulton County for probably 4 years. 4.5 years, really. But I'd just been elected there, and 4.5 years. And I got credit for being in the Army 3.5 years. And all I had to do was 8 years, and I could have drawn full retirement. And that was my first term. I got credit for everything except being married.
Oh, well. Well, I guess it was time to read.
But I enjoy my work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know.
Okay. Well, something else that was happening along about that time was the opening of the child murder files and the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes. That caused me a lot of headaches. A lot of research, a lot of files to read. Oh, my Lord. Worked all summer on it. That was just a couple of years ago.
Was there anything in particular that you thought was significant or different
I just felt that there's a statute, that says that if something has been, no decision has been made on it within 5 years, if they cannot be they should be made public after that. And I felt that the public was entitled to see all the files and all that sort of thing. And I just ruled that they could see them. And then one thing happened that I didn't notice on some of the files. In fine print down at the bottom, it had FBI, the FBI records, you know. And at that time, I didn't realize it. But when that did come to my attention, in fact, it was raised by the district attorney for the federal courts. And I promptly ordered them to return the FBI files and not to make them, not to publish them. And they actually filed, and of course, the Judge O'Brien dismissed it immediately but I didn't know. It's just one of those mistakes that you can't make that I didn't see as part of the FBI file.
Well, I think one of the...
it was confidential from the FBI.
Yeah. One of the things that the press or the public picked up on was the large number of suspects that they had.
They had a lot of
in
suspects.
that. Yeah, I think the number was 80, which was rather...
And there was so much commotion about it, I felt people were entitled to see what happened. See if anything was covered up.
And also you called for the release of Wayne Williams' file, which I think was a little bit after that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then you made the headlines again about nude dancing in the Gold Club.
Yeah, Gold Club.
Oh.
Club. Well,
What did you...
Well, I just felt that you see what happened in that case was that the city of Atlanta gave them a license for it to have whiskey with the club. And then after they built the club and spent all the money building the club, they wanted to withdraw the license to sell whiskey. Yes, I'll be through first. I just felt that, that's wrong for them to withdraw a license. They'd already given it and so forth, and I just authorized them to do it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Honor the license.
Okay. And the semi-automatic weapons, would you have any comment about ruling on that? The semi-automatic weapons case?
I don't think I ruled on that.
That only the Georgia General Assembly could regulate the sale of firearms.
Oh, yes, I did, certainly. Oh, yes, by all means. They're the only ones who can do it according to law. Definitely. I just slipped my mind. Short-term retention.
But it was the sale. Someone was attempting to sell.
Yes,
and someone brought a suit.
That's right.
Okay. And another, well, this would be an obscenity case. It was not, it was more, it was a little different than Never on Sunday. It was the story of O.
Oh.
That was a movie.
That was funny.
Yeah.
That was really funny, story of O.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten that fellow's name. It owned 2 or 3 theaters out there, but anyhow, story of O. And that was a jury question. McAuliffe, he was a solicitor over in the state court.
Who was that?
Henson McAuliffe.
Oh, yeah.
Henson was he felt so strong. He came over, and with other lawyers in that case, and it was a jury trial. And the jury, the defendant in the case, he said, I want him to see the movie, he said. And I said, all right. And he said he'd set it up and everything, so we took the jury out to the theater, and my court reporter, my sheriff, we all officers of the court went out there, and we had a private showing on the story of Oak. And there's not a thing in the world wrong with that movie. I mean, not a thing. Well, the jury came back and run out 5 minutes. And Henson, it just, oh, he felt so bad about that.
Yeah.
But the jury ruled it was not, and that's this, it has to stimulate the prurient interest in the community where the thing is shown. You might take it up to Philadelphia and the, what do you call those people up there who wear black hats and wear whole coats black and everything?
Amish,
yeah.
yes.
And they definitely hold it was, but this is not an Amish community. And that's the standard in the United States Supreme Court. If it stimulates the prurient interest of the people that are there. And that's what the jury had to find.
Well, now let's talk about...
My own daughter lives in Unitarian Gold Club, not very far from there. And oh, she's just 18. And she, Daddy, you know, I can't talk to you about that case, Pat. I just can't talk to you.
But she was living there, and she had some very definite feelings.
Oh, yeah, she and that community. Oh, it was strong that holds that Gold Club. A lot of people were.
Well, now I wanted us to talk about two items that pertain to Georgia State. I'm about out of tape, so I'll have to change. But anyway, the first one will be your ruling that the Georgia Board of Regents did not we're not subject to the state's Open Records Act.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that they were not required to reveal the names of the finalists that were being considered for the president, the position of president of Georgia State. And would you care to comment on?
Well, I thought I was right, but it was declared moot.
Oh.
I thought I was right about it because I felt this, and this is what I will comment about. I felt that we needed to select the very best person that we could find any place to be the president of Georgia State University. And I did not feel that if it were, for example, suppose, let's be ridiculous for a minute. Suppose the president of Columbia University in Chicago, or either Columbia University in New York, was interested in coming. And he wanted to stay there if he didn't get it. And his name was published that he was being considered. That'd be very embarrassing. Now that was the purpose of my ruling. And I felt we could select a better person without exposing the people that we were considering, because they wanted held confidential.
Well, then let's go on to a brighter side of that. Would you speak about your role in bringing a law school to Georgia State?
I'll tell you exactly. I'll tell you that briefly. I was at Hannah and Anna Norris's home.
Okay, Dr. Manners.
Dr. Manners.
Was that Dr. George?
George Manners. He's retired now from Georgia State, but he was, at that time, I think he was still active. And I told him, I said, you need a law school at Georgia State University. Big city like this, you need a law school. He said, gosh, I didn't know you were interested. And I'd like to, would you accept a position on the committee to set it up? I said, sure, well, I'll be glad to do what I can to try to get a law school for Georgia State. So they would meet about every 6 months for breakfast. And all they talked about was, nobody did anything, they just talked about it. And I told Dr. Langdale, I said, Doctor, if I don't have opposition next time, I'll chair that damn committee and get the law school set up for you. And when it didn't have opposition, I called him. And I said, all right, I don't have opposition, I'm ready. He said, let's go to work. Okay. So I accepted the chairmanship and set up a
Well, now
steering
this
committee.
opposition was kind of an inside thing that you were aware of. And
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. And during that when I was on and went to a couple of meetings, I'd only been to maybe a couple of meetings of the board when I found out what the trouble was, because in the meantime, I had talked to Mr. Neal rather, Henry Neal, who was the lawyer for the Board of Regents. And I'd indicated to Henry that I was interested, and I thought we ought to have a law school at Georgia State University. Well, Henry was just as cold as he could be about it. I couldn't even warm him up. And yet I've known Henry for years. He was in the legislature when I was there years ago, and he was Governor Vanderbilt's executive secretary. I mean, I've known him for years. We go to the same church, you know. Knew Henry well. And I couldn't get any interest at all. So I said that we're going to start meeting 3 times a week for breakfast. And we started meeting for breakfast, set up a steering committee. And the people that taught us, the University of Georgia, Woodrow Wilson Law School, John Marshall Law School, MU University, Mercer University, and they all of them fought us vigorously fought us. But we kept digging, we kept working, and in fact, I'll be frank with you, I think one of the main reasons was we had a good chancellor, head of the Board of Regents at the time. Not the one that had been there before, but Vernon Crawford, whom I knew. And Vernon, I got Vernon's ear. And Vernon said, Henry, go to work on it. And we started, and we had, I'll tell you, it was a fight. It was a fight. But we got everybody at that time, a lady, I can't think of her name, but she was the chairman of the Board of Regents at the time, and she was head of one of the law schools at Georgia State, not law school, but one of the colleges, at Georgia State University. What's her name? I can't think of it.
In this, Betty Siegel?
No.
No, not Dr. Siegel.
No. But anyhow, she was on the board of Regents. And, of course, she disqualified herself from voting. But we got the vote of everyone who contacted all of them in advance. Of course, a lot of groundwork was laid, a lot of maneuvering, a lot of work. And we finally got it down to the vote where we got every vote except the one from where the University of Georgia is located in Athens, the board member there, and Sidney Smith, whom we never could sell Sidney, who was on the board at the time. Sidney, I've known Sidney for years. He was one of my colleagues on the Superior Court in Gainesville. He served for 15 years on the federal court as chief judge of the district court, and he was with one of the largest law firms here. And taking him down to Commerce Club and buy him a good lunch and tried to sell him, but couldn't sell him. But we managed to sell enough. We got every vote except those 3.
Well, we haven't mentioned any dates in this. Do you recall now when you first started meeting, when Dr. Manners first mentioned this?
Oh, Lord. Well, I'll tell you,
Would it have been prior to 1980? Was it prior to 1980?
When I was first on the board, yes. I was first on the board. Ed Hughes was there then. Working as, I don't know when Ed left. Ed Hughes. Working right hand, for Dr. Langdale.
Oh, okay.
Well, anyhow, he left because he realized he didn't have a future ahead of him, and that he went to another university. He thought he had a future, but I worked closely with Ed at the time. It was when I was chief judge of this court. We rotate chief judgeship, and I was chief judge about 8 or 9 years ago. And I had an administrative assistant that was supplied by the state at that time, and I had him to do my footwork and make all my appointments, do everything. And got the job done, just for rolling up our sleeves, that's all. And then we had a fight in the legislature to get any money. We finally got it. And you ought to see it now. Have you seen it? All right, you've seen it. Atlanta needed it. And I'll tell you the main reason I was so motivated. I did my undergraduate work at Emory. I went to Atlanta Law School at night when I was working. 3 years. And I felt that other people might be in the same situation that I was in, and I thought they were entitled to a legal education without having to pay $15,000 to Emory or $12,000 to Mercer or $8,000 at the University of Georgia and be able to work and get it. Now that's the reason I did it. And you know what they told me over there the other day? They told me that 90% of the blacks passed the bar that took the exam.
Well, they have had a
90%.
spectacular record, the law school has. Could you speak about that?
I'm just so proud of it, I hardly know what to do, that's all, but I think we were exceedingly fortunate. We got Ben Johnson, who just retired as the dean of the Emory University, and he was familiar with academia and knew how to do it, knew what the need was, rolled up his sleeves and made a great sacrifice to come and do it. And he got everything set up, got it started in the right direction, and it's remained on that course since then.
Do you recall any of the enrollment statistics or any of that kind of thing? Of course, I can get those from
You'd have to get it from them. I just know, and let me tell you one thing that they did. I belong to the Delta Theta Phi legal fraternity, and they named the fraternity over there the Delta Theta Senate, what they call it, Luther Alverson Senate.
Great.
Nice of them to do it. And they gave me that award, and that's the highest award that the Georgia State University.
And what is the name of that award? It's the Golden Staff Award
Of Georgia State University.
Okay.
And
Well,
now they, you want me to read that to you?
no, I
right.
think that's okay. But it was
All right.
presented on May the 12th, 1988.
That's right.
Uh-huh. And it says the shepherd's staff signifies sanctity and protection and has as a shepherd enriched both its time and its place. Yeah. Well, that's certainly an achievement.
I didn't do all of that by myself. And a lot of people worked. The only thing I did was the motivating, driving force to move it. That's all.
Yeah. Well, it takes that sometimes.
Yeah, oh, it does.
Yeah.
But the main thing I want to say, it was the idea whose time has come. I've even forgotten who said that. Who was it?
Hugo.
Hugo.
Victor Hugo.
It was Victor Hugo. I just couldn't think. But the idea, it was a time for, to implement it. It was a time to have a law school at Georgia State. And it's fortunate that it was done when it was done. The state has enjoyed nice prosperity during the last 8 or 10 years, and that's when it was set up. That's the reason it's there now. It was my responsibility to set up the public defender system in this court and to arrange for people to be represented. We had a decision that came from the appellate courts with reference to people who could not afford lawyers, that they were entitled to counsel, and it was the responsibility of the state to provide it. And therefore it was necessary for us to set up some kind of system. In the beginning we set up a system where we exempted lawyers 50 years or older, and we would appoint lawyers to come in and represent them without charge. Just by, at that time, the court had the authority to just pick lawyers and appoint them to do it. without charge, which we did, and it didn't work out very well. Frankly, many lawyers were not as familiar with the criminal law as they would have if they were specializing in criminal law. Therefore, we felt we needed to improve the administration of the defense counsel. And then we started paying a small fee of $25 per day for representing, and finally increased it to $50, and then increased it to $200 ultimately of independent counsel. And but quite a few years ago, I don't remember exactly how long, we set up the public defender system, and Mr. Herndon was the head. Jess Watson was the first public defender.
Walton, was that?
Watson.
Watson.
W-A-T-S-O-N.
Okay.
And he was in the Attorney General's office and went from the Attorney General's office there. And then after he left, Mr. Herndon was the public defender for a good number of years. Now Mr. Pitts is the public defender. And his staff has increased over the years, and he still doesn't have sufficient funds to pay what lawyers are entitled to for court work. But he does have young lawyers that are willing to get in there and fight, and they've got some good ones, and they've got some that are not quite so good. But they're doing the best they can with the funds and the job that they have to do. And that's one change, big change. And of course, we've had quite a few changes in the state law. For example, it has been helpful. We formerly had jury sentencing, which was very helpful to the administration of justice. And even in a civil case, once a jury was selected, you had to keep that jury together if they were deliberating, and they'd have to spend the night in a hotel. We modified the statute to where we could excuse them overnight under proper instructions, and it only has to be done in a capital case now, and if it can be done by agreement, then you can excuse jurors overnight, which was a very fine thing to do, because of course we have to instruct them very carefully as to their conduct and their conversations. And if anyone tries to talk to you in the case, call us immediately and report it to the court, and many other things of that kind. We've also formally, a defendant could make what is known as an opening statement. It didn't have to be sworn at all. And that law has been changed during the last few years. A good number of years ago, I was trying a murder case of a woman that had killed her husband. She not only shot him in the back, but she shot him once in the back and twice in the front. And the only thing he had in his hands was air, that's all. And she talked for 3.5 hours without stopping. We couldn't interrupt him at that time, and that woman had one of the most retentive mind and memories of anybody I've ever seen in all of my life or heard. And every little I that this fellow failed to dot, and every little T he failed to cross during the entire married life, she talked in that 3.5 hours incessantly. And she was acquitted. So, it's just it just doesn't make sense for them not to be sworn and not to be subject to the same rules and everything that everybody else is to. So that law was finally changed. It took years of work. And I could just go on and tell you a lot of improvements that have been made over the years. And appellate work, civil acts, the civil act rather, of CPA, what we call the Civil Procedure Act, is modified, and we've streamlined a lot of things. All kinds of changes have been made that I could go on just for hours. But and I think it's improved the administration of justice. For example, lawyers have to meet, they have to study ethics today, and the judges have to study ethics, and we have to. I myself, in the morning, I'm going over to the university for 12 hours of training, and each judge every year has to do 12 hours of training, and every lawyer has to do it now. So we've improved the profession a great deal, and improving the administration of justice as well. So many changes. I don't think you'd want to sit here long enough for me to tell you all of them. These are just two or three that have occurred over the years. I formerly served as president of the Council of the Superior Court Judges for the state of Georgia, and I've been very active in these improvements.
Well, that was really my point, was your role in some of these changes.
Oh yes, I played an active role all the way through on all of these reforms, every one of them, without question. And
well, now Judge Frank Hooper, just could you?
Frank is one of the finest men I've ever known in my life. I was practiced law with Frank before World War II. He went on the Superior Court on Monday, and I went in the Army on Friday. And he was a wonderful man. In fact, I asked his advice when I was thinking about running for the legislature. He said, "Luther, I want to tell you, I don't know whether I should advise you or not what to do. He's sort of like advising a man to take his first drink. I don't know whether it's going to make you or ruin you." He said, "I'd rather not advise you about that." And he had served in the legislature. In fact, he was in the legislature when Dick Russell was in the legislature, and they were friends there, and Dick recommended him to be to the federal court. And let me tell you something about Frank, Judge Hooper rather. And but when I was in the House, he was being considered for the federal court appointment, and someone had passed a resolution in the Senate with a few senators to support a man that was being considered at the same time from Gainesville, Georgia. And I got 172 people in the House to sign a resolution for Frank. So that I hope it had some effect, but I'm sure it helped some. But of course, the fact that he was a good friend of Dick Russell is the main reason.
It might have been more significant.
Oh, sure, no doubt about that.
Well, he was there.
Great man, great Christian man, great. Wonderful
he was there at a significant time, though, in our state's history, because
he handled all the segregation cases.
Yes.
All of them.
Well, could you comment about any of those, your recollections of what was happening?
Well, he of course passed on. He had every one of the immigration cases that came before the federal court.
Was it school desegregation?
Oh yes,
yeah, okay.
Everything involved. Everything involved. And the district court, as far as local this circuit was concerned, the Northern District of Georgia, everything. And is a sterling character. And his firm was Hooper and Miller before World War II. And he went on the Superior Court just before I went in the Army.
Well, did you have any role in any integration cases, civil rights, or?
Didn't come to this court. They all went to the federal court. I'll tell you one thing that happened in my service on the bench was relating to civil rights. A very prominent Atlanta lawyer called me years ago when all this was in the air, and he said, "Luther, I want to tell you something. if you don't stop calling those blacks Mister in your courtroom, you're going to be defeated the next time. I said, well, now, I told him, I said, now you listen to me. As long as I'm on this court, I'm going to continue to call everybody in my court, including blacks, Mister. And I've outlived him. I'm not going to tell you who he was, but a prominent Atlanta lawyer. And I wasn't defeated either.
Well, that was the thing about it. It did take courage.
Sure it did.
It took courage for the whole family, really, because
Certainly.
everybody became almost a target.
That's right.
For extreme groups.
That's right.
And so, but anyway, Judge Hooper did get the brunt of
Yes, he did.
the segregation rulings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couldn't have gone before a better man, I'll tell you that.
Well, that was good, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the finest men that I've ever known.
Well, I really appreciate
Well,
all of the time, and I think our
Okay.
time is definitely up, but I
All
really
right.
appreciate
Okay.
both interviews,
all
and
right.
we're very grateful.